Just 1 second. We've been streaming these simultaneously to YouTube, and that way it gets recorded to there. So. Okay, Cory.
On a really easy way to look at devices from a what some people call a white box perspective. That's basically where you have access to the machine as it's running, and you get a chance to look at it dynamically. So you will get a chance to examine running services, configuration files, basically everything from the perspective of, say, something like a web application where you have a root shell. So this is kind of a cool one for especially people that are just getting started, because you get some instant gratification of a root shell, because who doesn't like getting a root shell? And it's relatively cheap to get into. You need very minimal supplies. Yeah, so I'll go ahead and get started. So the goals of the presentation. My intention here is to give you like kind of a bag full of stuff that you can go buy, come home, and uh, set it up and get started right away hacking. It's not very expensive. You don't need a whole lot of stuff. It doesn't get you too far into some of the techniques like pulling firmware from EEPROM chips and stuff like that. This kind of stays like a level above that. But still, if you have experience doing any type of web app pen testing or any type of like binary exploitation, you'll find that as soon as you get on the device, a lot of that stuff is now fair game. So yeah, the next goal would be using some of these devices. So I intend to live stream me soldering this up and setting up the serial connection from the FTDI controller, from the router to the FTDI controller, and then from that to my laptop, which is set up right next to my workstation. So when we're ready, I'll turn the camera towards that so that you can see the exact commands that I'm entering, how I set up the screen session to accept an incoming serial connection, and you'll see the boot log come up and we'll have a root shell. And I hope to do that time permitting. So as long as the presentation doesn't run too long and I don't get kicked out of here. So yeah, what it's not, I'm not going to be discussing any vulnerabilities per se today. This is all built-in functionality to the router. We're not going to be dropping any 0 days or anything like that. I'm basically want to get you to a point where you can start looking for vulnerabilities yourself, or just experiment. I have looked through both of these a little bit and haven't come across anything yet. Doesn't mean there isn't stuff there, but yeah, it's really just fun doing stuff like this and learning how things work, and just messing around on the command line and looking at how these things function. They're definitely a little bit different from if you've installed like a Linux distribution or something like that. It's definitely a different beast from that. It's different architecture. Um, it's cool to take a device that costs $8 and you have a a command line session on it and you wander around it just kind of the same way you would a Ubuntu box or something like that. But yeah, you probably want to consult some electronic safety, because there is a little bit of electronics knowledge required to do this stuff. We're mainly dealing with pretty low voltage stuff, so it's not super dangerous. Like, it probably not going to shock you or anything like that if you touch stuff. But if you short out, if you get a short on here with between a wire or something, it can definitely heat up and cause a fire. So I would highly recommend that you go over your electronic safety and you know, get familiar with that stuff before you just go connecting wires places. So I'm still pretty new at this. I just got into it, so this was kind of my first foray was setting this up because it looked easy. So I was gonna kind of share that with you guys because I think it's kind of good to see. Like I kind of like to see somebody that's like a little bit ahead of me, like where they're at, because I feel like they can kind of relate some of the like the struggles of being a noob um, to me. So hopefully I can do the same. Um, Again, this is probably one of the easiest ones to start out doing. If you have a little bit of electronics knowledge, like I have quite a bit from doing car stuff. It's translates right over, you know, instant gratification. You get a root shell right off the bat. It's always cool. And then the prices, it like I want to say all this stuff together. If you went out and bought it, with the exception of like I'm using a Fluke multimeter, with the exception of that, you could probably pick everything up for about $70. So some of the prereqs, Linux knowledge, because you'll be on the command line. So if you know how to navigate a Linux terminal, you know, you can pick that up pretty easy. Or if you don't, I mean, it's honestly, you could probably figure it out pretty quick, just messing around with this stuff. And then basic electronics knowledge. The only things you'll really be dealing with here are DC voltage and then resistance. So if you brush up a little bit on those and kind of understand what they mean, you'll be fine to figure this type of stuff out. But hopefully watching me, you can kind of see how to do it and have an idea where to start. So the first device you would need is the USB to UART, the serial converter. So if you look at the left picture, that's where the wires are, that's where your signal is going to be coming in from the router. So we'll just be dealing with the ground and then transfer and receive. So those are exactly what they sound like. Ground is it, best way to describe it is the negative. If you're familiar with like putting batteries in something, so it ground is like a ground reference to the chassis. So basically where you don't want to connect positive voltage. And then transfer is going to be where the controller is going to send a signal from the controller to the router. And then receive is going to receive serial communication from the router. So those might get a little bit confusing because transfer on this controller is going to be receive. You're going to connect that to receive on the router, and then receive or transfer from the router, you're going to connect to receive on this. So you won't line those up. You'll technically do like a crossover type connection on them. So you can pick this guy up pretty cheap on Amazon, or I got mine at Micro Center. If you're close to a Micro Center, they probably have one in stock for, you know, a few dollars, which is where I went and got mine. The two routers that I used, I picked both of these up for under $10. The Netgear you may or may not find. I think I just got lucky on that one. I was looking on Amazon for cheap routers to take a look at, and came across this one, looked under the return section, and it was hanging out in there for like $8 or $9. So I just kind of grabbed it. But I think when I looked at those a couple days ago, new, they're like 40 or 50 bucks. I wouldn't spend that much on a router just to get started with this stuff. I'd probably go with one of these TP links on the right. They're pretty consistently cheap, like I think around $15. But you can see on the right, I actually have one set up where I've soldered the wires together, and you can see the little controller and the bottom portion of the router. That one's set up and ready to go. And I actually have it set up on my desk right now. So if I mess up or for some reason it doesn't work with the Netgear, which I plan to do on camera, we at least have that one set up so I can kind of show you like what it looks like whenever you connect to it over
Hey,
screen.
hey, Corey.
Yeah.
People in the chat asking if we're supposed to see something and letting you know we didn't see anything yet. I don't know if you're switching from slide. Oh, now we can. You see pictures. Okay.
Okay. Did you guys miss any slides before? If you said something, I didn't hear you.
Oh, I muted again. Sorry. Yeah, we can see pictures now, but earlier there weren't any pictures.
Okay, cool. I'll keep a good eye on chat and make sure it doesn't happen again. Let's see. All right, so miscellaneous other items. Grab a soldering iron. I grabbed that on Amazon as well. It's a cool little pack that comes with the desoldering gun, which is essentially like a vacuum pump that after you heat solder up, you can depress that pump, release it. It'll pull solder out of the joint so that you can take stuff apart if you mess it up. So it's nice to practice. Like I've put these together and pulled them apart a couple of times now just to get a little bit of practice soldering stuff. I grabbed some spare wire that made it a lot easier, so I wasn't dealing with like stripping and twisting wires. And then multimeter. That's the one that I use, but you don't have to have anything expensive. Like a cheap $5-10 one would be fine. So we get into what UART is. It's a device that is on these used for asynchronous serial communication. So you can transmit and receive serial communication. We'll be dealing with RS-232, which is a standard for communication between devices. So communication between like a terminal and then a device. So it's just a standard that defines some of the specs, like what is below, like what they're called, transmit, receive, ground, and then what voltages indicate, a 1 or a 0. Yeah, most protocols have some type of specification that formally defines like what it is, so that people don't just go out and use whatever they want. So the way you find a UART port is you'll typically see 4 or 6 of these holes in a line. I have a picture of them for the Netgear, and then one for the TP-Link. You can see the TP-Link I left soldered up from when I assembled it. The Netgear, I removed it because I plan on using it tonight. So you pull it apart. These are pretty easy to find if you just look over the board. And sometimes they're labeled, sometimes they're not. So you can see the one on the TP-Link was like super convenient. Is that better?
Yes.
Okay. So yeah, you can see on the Netgear, neither of the none of the ports are labeled. So you have to go through and measure voltage at each one, and then resistance to determine which one's ground and then which one is VCC, being the positive power signal, and then which one is transmit and receive. So I'll show you how to do that on camera as well when we get to that portion. So identifying them is fairly easy. You'll essentially use for receive and for ground, you'll use resistance. I use the diode checker just because it gives an audible beep whenever you actually hit like a ground. Typically it's used for checking diodes, which are essentially check valves for current. It allows current to flow in one direction but not the other. So this particular instance, you're just looking for something that is shorting to ground. It'll either show 0 ohms, or if you use the diode checker, it'll make an audible beep. Receive doesn't do that. It will typically register as a ground for like a split second, but after that, it will not. So you'll get like a beep and then nothing, which I'll demonstrate on camera. Then for transfer and VCC, the best way to identify these, which was my learning experience, you look for on VCC, you're going to see like a consistent 3.3 volts if it's a 3.3 volt system. If it's a 5 volt system, then you would see just a consistent 5 volts. However, transfer, if you think about it, is data coming in. So it's positive pulses of positive voltage pulses, so kind of like a square wave. So on a digital multimeter, that'll probably registers as like kind of fluctuating looking voltage depending on how much data is being sent. An analog multimeter might actually be a little bit, might actually show that a little bit better, but easy enough. Just look for the one that is consistent, positive 3.3 volts on systems like these. So it's just a quick demonstration of identifying ground. It's a good idea to always check your multimeter, as I'm showing here. When you go to resistance, just check and make sure that you get a short when you touch the cables together. And then, as I was discussing with ground earlier, and I referred to chassis ground. So each of these little copper rings are good sources for ground. And then the same with these large, like large silver shielding covers. They're like shielding covers over microprocessors. So I use those as well to check for ground, and they work fine. Like I said, use the diode checker. You'll get an audible beep as soon as you touch, as soon as you find the ground port on your UART connector. So soldering, I usually start by just trimming the wires short. I bought these from Micro Center. They have like provisioned just pins essentially. Super easy to trim those down. Again, I'll show that on camera as well. But I just trim them down so it's a little bit neater and it's not sticking out like way past. Because like I discussed before, if you short something out, like it can heat up and cause a fire. So definitely don't want that to happen. And then from the backside, on the left picture, you'll see it before it's soldered. And then on the right side, my slide just died. So you guys can let me know when you can see that again.
Yep, we can see it.
Okay. So on the right, you will see the solder after it's applied. So the way I go about this is by, yeah, it could be something with that. My UPS has been going off all day, so for all I know, it is power issues. So I usually start by melting a little bit of solder on the tip of my soldering iron, inserting the wire, and then when you have a pool of molten solder on the end of the soldering iron, just apply it, goes in. You just want to be careful, like you see these lines in between each of these, you want to be careful and not have it cross over and cause a short in between them, because again, that would be bad. So yeah, that probably better to just see it than try and figure it out from pictures. So this part, yeah, like I had discussed before, getting transfer to receive correct could be a little bit confusing if you're just getting started, because transmit from the board is going to go to receive on the controller. That was another learning experience for me. I got them wrong at first. So if you do get them wrong, chances are your device just won't power on. It comes on for a second and then just shuts off. So if that happens, you probably just need to switch them. But if you have a good idea which one's which, you'll probably get it right on the first try, unlike me. So on the controller as well, you want to make sure that whenever you check VCC and you get either 3.3 or 5 volts, you select the appropriate setting on your controller. Again, you don't want to mess up and like connect VCC to ground or something like that. It might break something. I don't know for sure, but it may break something. And then when I'm doing this part, I typically wait and I don't connect my PC to the controller, just in case I, do screw something up and, for whatever reason, it causes a problem with my computer. So there's quite a few different options for setting up your serial console. If you're on Windows, you can use something like Putty is probably what I would recommend. I did see a way to do it in PowerShell, but I would leave that up to you if that's the way you want to do it. Ultimately, I would probably just spin up a Linux VM because I'm a lot more comfortable in Linux, but you don't have to. Multitude of ways to do it. Linux options are Screen, TIO, Minicom. There's also graphical options on there if you want a graphical option. If you like Putty, you can download Putty and use it. GTK term, I use that for a couple of times. It's pretty nice because you don't have to deal with like learning the commands of Screen or whatever. It's all pretty intuitive. So when you set up a connection, when you connect your FTDI controller, you can do it without connecting it to your router, and you can look for the USB device to come up. Which, if my slides are showing up correctly, you'll see the TTY USB 0 show up. So whenever that shows up, that's the device file for your controller. So that's what you'll actually be connecting to using Screen. And Screen is available on all Linux distros, pretty easy to install. If you're having issues seeing it, like if you're not seeing this pop up, I would do like a LS USB on the terminal and look to see this. On mine, it's Future Technology Devices International. I would look to see something along the lines of that pop up. So it's probably going to show this UART. Yeah. The part that you might have to do a little bit of trial and error on is getting the baud rate correct. So this again is just going to be trial and error. I guessed like, I think it was like 2 or 3 times I had to try different rates to get it right. If you don't get it right, it's just going to spit a bunch of gibberish out to Screen. It's pretty easy to identify whenever you get it wrong. But just keep trying, just go down the list. There's only so many of them. Eventually you'll get it right and you'll see a boot log. It'd be a little more concerning if you just don't see anything come out to Screen. That probably means that there's a problem somewhere. And the command that you'll run if you're using Screen is just Screen. You'll point it at you'll pass the device file to it, and then you'll specify the baud rate, which is that last part. And if it's correct, you will see a boot log like in this picture. And it's going to run through that for a while. So you generally have a root shell not too long after this runs. It's going to spit out a bunch of stuff, but it'll also continue to spit stuff to the screen like as you're using it. From what I've read, there are ways around that. I never really bother with it because I'm not like doing too much. Like it doesn't bother me enough to like want to like mess with it. So I just continue to use it. And then there's an example of what you're going to see if you get the baud rate incorrect. So that happens in Screen. You do a Control A and then colon quit, and just press up, try a new baud rate, go at it again. So after you get a shell, keep in mind on my particular devices, they were MIPS based, so it's not just going to be like a regular x86 64 system. You won't be able to just compile something on your box normally and transfer it over and use it. It's a completely different architecture, so you'll need to, if you're going to compile tools like BusyBox or something to use on it, you're going to need to compile it in a similar environment if you want to use that on the router. Also on these, probably the first thing you'll notice if you're familiar with a regular Linux system is these have very stripped down tools. So there's not a lot of storage on these devices, so they really pare them down to only what they need. Adding stuff is a good idea. Something like BusyBox, if you want some more functionality, it's good to add that stuff. That'll give you a lot more of the native Linux commands, but again, you're probably going to run into storage issues. Like I know whenever I looked on this one, it's pretty much maxed out as it is. So there's not really a whole lot of room to add more stuff. So that's kind of a new problem to solve as far as getting, being able to use tools. Probably not going to get a lot of quick wins as far as like creds, like I looked on here and I know there are creds on here, but again, like these all typically come with a pretty weak credential. So yeah, I suppose if like hypothetically, if you were doing an engagement and you were able to look at one of these and get a password that was usable somewhere else, I could see that being useful. But as far as a vulnerability, I didn't really see any like big opportunities for stuff like that, other than the fact that you can go on and look and yep, there's the default password or the password that you set. But otherwise, a lot of these are going to require a little bit more looking than that to find a good vulnerability. There's a lot of like compiled HTTPD modules, a lot of binaries to pull apart. Yeah, stuff like that is kind of probably the direction that I would go. And then it's going to be kind of an annoying terminal, just that you'll probably get some lags. It's, you're communicating through like 2 wires here. So, and you're communicating on something that doesn't necessarily have a lot of power. I know I run into a lot of like lags, especially if you like cat the wrong file or something like that. It's going to be painful waiting for that thing to quit. In some instances, I usually just turn it off and turn it back on. But yeah, good thing to learn here is whichever utility you're going to use for your connection, like learn how to use it. It's a lot easier like once you learn how to like kill a session, restart it. Like scrolling up and down, you won't necessarily get scroll in this, so there's commands and screen to be able to do that, that become very useful if you're catting like a larger file and you need to scroll back up. So definitely recommend getting familiar with the tools that you're using. These are kind of some of the things that stood out to me, but again, each person's different and different things are going to stand out to different people. So yeah, this is kind of the area that I would leave it to you to go after whatever interests you, and whatever you want to look at. But some of these, there may even be vulnerabilities that just haven't been identified like in this particular router, but example like something like drop bear, it may already have a vulnerability and like it just hasn't been patched on this router. So it might just be a little bit of tweaking to get it to work. Yeah, this is again the area where I would like leave you to look at whatever interests you. So as I talked about earlier, one of the first things that I kind of messed around with was BusyBox, to be able to make use of some of the like more common Linux tools. If you look, I compiled BusyBox on my test VM, and you can see just the difference in like the amount of functionality you get on a full version of BusyBox versus what they're using. Lots and lots of like useful functionality, and the one on the right, still quite a bit on the one on the left. Definitely stuff you can use, like TFTP could be good for transferring files. Yeah, again, this would be another exercise that I would leave to you to, if you wanted to mess around with that stuff. Now, hopefully my demo works out okay. So. Be able to see my camera?
Yes.
Okay, cool. All right, so no pressure.
We're not seeing it anymore, though.
It came up for a second.
Yep, it's back.
Okay. All right, so first thing you'll want to do is identify your pins. So if you can see this okay, you can see the UART connection right here. So I already have a pretty good idea of which pins are which, but for sake of the video, for demonstrating it, flip it over so it looks like it will look from the top. So first thing I would identify, like I said, I would use the diode connector, and you can see whenever you short out, you just get an audible beep. You want to use resistance, you're basically just looking for, close to a 0. So that's, that's essentially a short. But I'll go with this just because it gives an audible beep. And again, you can use any one of like these. You can use these shields. Basically, I just wouldn't use like this type of stuff. I would kind of stick to these larger metal areas. And you'll walk along. So like this one, we get like a beep if you listen, like just a momentary beep. So chances are that's going to be your receive side on the board. If we go here, that gives a momentary beep, but this is not going to be the receive side. I'll show you why in a second. We get nothing here. When we get to this one, we get a solid beep. So we know that this one is going to be ground. So at that point, once I identified ground, I would go ahead and start by trimming down one of these, and I would just trim it down to about there. So from there, we identified it was this one on the end. So seed it, that looks okay. It's right here. So from there, I would get like a little bit of solder on the end. Just something kind of like that. I don't know if you can see it, but it's just tiniest little dot of solder. And I usually do like kind of a little pull test. And if you want to, you can just test to make sure you get a short through the wire. So we know that's good. And I wouldn't really stress too much over getting like your solder's perfect or anything if you're just testing it. Again, we just need it to work. So from here, I would plug in. And this one has a pretty convenient on-off switch, but you may have to, like on the TP link, you may just have to connect and disconnect because it comes on as soon as you plug power in. But from here, you're going to identify your VCC, which was just consistent 3.3 volts, and then also your transfer, which is going to be the one that fluctuates a little bit, which hopefully you'll be able to see through on the multimeter. So again, we'll just go back to ground. When we look on here, this pin, have to turn it on. So we have a light so we know it's on. From here, if we touch this one that's kind of covered, we see that it is pretty rock solid 3.27. If we go to this one, you can kind of see how it's sort of fluctuating. I hope that is showing up through the camera, but it's kind of bouncing around between like 2.1, 2.4, 3.2. So we know that this one right next to ground is going to be the transmit from the board. So that's going to be the port the board is sending information to your controller. And then if we test this other one on the end, we see that it's essentially like 0. So that's going to be your receive side of the board. So that'll be receiving information from your computer that goes to the controller, gets converted into serial communication, and then sent to the router. So from there, you would just decide which wires you want to use. I'll use, say, yellow for transmit from the router. And just do the same thing again. Just trim one of these down. And go ahead and set one up. We'll do white, which will be receive on the router. So turn it off. Probably just disconnect the power for good measure. So we identified that one. Let's transmit from the router. So a quick little pull test on that. Seems good. And then we decided that receive was going to be this one on here. Yeah, Wusa. I tried so hard to get what was it called? I think it was called 2M in the Navy. I wanted to take that so bad just because I was always kind of interested in this stuff, but they wouldn't let me take it for some reason. I was a CWIS tech, so I kind of just wanted to be able to like fix my own stuff, sort of. Too much solder. Not the best soldering job in the world, but it'll probably do. Okay. So now we have our 3 wires set up, and I'm gonna unplug the soldering iron so I don't burn myself. So all in all, pretty easy as far as soldering goes. And now that you have these leads, it's like super easy to check stuff if you want to like confirm that you have things correct. Like if you wanted to confirm that this is indeed your receive. So yep, we can tell watching this kind of bounce around that that is indeed transmit from the board. Then that is indeed ground. So from here, look at your controller. And identify that this top one is ground. So these essentially can just insert in here. Another reason that I bought like these wires when I saw them is they're super easy to connect. And then we know that yellow is transmit from the board. So that's going to go to receive, which will be RxD, RX. RxD will just be receive data. TXD would be transfer data. So yeah, just transfer from board, receive on controller. And then receive on board will go to transfer on controller. So that's super easy connection. And then this is the little switch that I was talking about. So you will have 5 volts under here, which you may or may not be able to see. And then 3.3 volts. We verified that when we were doing our tests for voltage, that it is a 3.3 volt system. So you'll need to make sure that that is switched to 3.3 volts. And so that part is done. So now you would just get your whichever cable you want to use. And some of these just come in regular like USB-A, so you could plug it right into the USB port on your computer. Mine comes with like a mini USB, I want to say. So mine comes with that. When you plug it in, you'll get a blue light. It'll let you know that it's working. And then from here, everything else will pretty much happen on the terminal. So I'll try to reposition the camera to be able to see that. I really intended to like have this just on screen share, but didn't seem to want to cooperate. So is everybody able to see terminal?
Yes.
Cool. All right. So I need to root to be able to access these. And be able to see our controller right here. So we know that it's online. Our machine can see that controller. So that's good. ls dev for TTY USB 0, it's there. But if you just did like TTYU star, you'd see that you have a device file for that TTY USB 0. So at this point, you would apt install screen. Yes. And this is just I just installed this like right before the show. So just a base like Ubuntu 2010. So figured that'd be the easiest for people to relate to. So now that we have screen installed, you do a screen and then dev TTY USB 0 and had our baud rates. So we will try 57600 because I honestly don't remember which one this was. So if we try that, you'll basically hit enter, and it's going to go to this blank screen. And then when you power the modem on, you'll either see stuff you can read or stuff that you can't. So looks like we got it right. And you'll see all this kind of gibberish come out. This one may throw a couple errors because I don't have the antennas hooked up, so it may be looking for devices that don't exist. Could cause some problems, but probably not. Nothing that's going to affect us from doing this. So ideally, it's probably even worthwhile to go through and look through this log and just look at stuff because it may give you a good idea of, you know, different things that are on the box, different stuff that it uses. Things that get called on startup, you never know. If something comes up for a split second, it may give you an opportunity to exploit something. Yeah, just again, that's all kind of stuff that comes down to things that you are interested in or that you have like pretty good knowledge of. So you can see that we're root, so we can go anywhere we want to on the box. Most stuff is going to be in www, so you can see all these different files, but as you can tell, it's not like super easy to work with. Stuff under like different binaries that are on the box. This one has quite a bit more than the TP link does. You can see that like you have like find, that's super useful. So probably don't really need to add a whole lot of other tools on this one to even be able to do most stuff. But yeah, that's kind of the point that you could start looking for stuff and just playing around, seeing what you can find, pulling stuff off the box, looking at it, taking apart some of the binaries on there, pillaging around in the scripts to see how it operates, looking at some of the different services that may not be super visible through the GUI. So yeah. So that was pretty much all I had for the presentation. Did anybody have any questions or anything?
Well, thanks for that. Very interesting. If anyone has any questions, feel free to ask Cory. Everyone should have the ability to unmute themselves if they have questions. We're kind of waiting for.
So I have a question. So what's the end result? I know. It's cool that you can hack it, but what's your end result as far as what you do with it once you've got into it and you've discovered all the inner workings of what it's showing? Do you use this device to do something else, or do you just move on to the next device?
So the end result of when you get to this point would be that you can view how the device operates in real time, as well as pull off different programs, pull them apart, look for vulnerabilities. Yeah, so that would be the goal of it, would just be, as opposed to like plugging the device in on your network and just looking at like the web interface and trying to fuzz for stuff. Looking through this, if you actually can pull the app apart and see how it processes data, that can make your efforts a lot more targeted, and like what types of payloads, what types of fuzzing you do. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, sure.
And when you're in that root shell, if you make any configuration changes, would they be persistent across boots, or would it reset to whatever the firmware is flashed to after restart?
I haven't tested that a whole lot, but I mean, we could probably just test it right now. So it's mounted as a read-only file system, so you probably won't be able to change anything in there. So no dev SHM isn't going to work. But if it's mounted as a read-only file system, then you wouldn't be able to. I'm not sure if you could just look it up and see how to do, like see if you can remount it as writable. But yeah, as read-only, you're not going to be able to make any changes to it. So.
Okay, I had a question and then a clarity to the question before last.
Sure.
I'll go with the clarity first, then I'll ask the question. That, like, what do you do afterwards? Like, I'll just give an example of some local Dallas peeps that were doing some fun stuff with hardware hacking, and they did their, what is it called, Phil? I'm blanking on their 0-day thing that they were doing.
Oh, all day, all day.
Yeah, all day. They were hitting up some IP based webcam, like some cameras, like security cameras that are IP based. They pulled the firmware on those, were looking through, and they found a ELF binary application on the firmware. And then looking into that, I think they just did like a basic strings command on the binary and found hard coded API key for AWS that went to basically the file share where everybody's like stored video captures from movement or whatever their configurations were to store in the cloud. And they were able to just have free reign looking through not only their own, but everybody else's pictures and videos, if I remember correctly, just by pulling off the ELF binary and running strings against it and finding that API key. So this depends. Are you trying to like bug hunt, or doing it for your own safety of your own devices? Or, I guess it really depends on what you're trying to do. Just an example of what you could do. And then my question is, to that extent, Cory, like, what's the coolest thing you found so far on different devices while doing this?
So not long after I started doing this, I got a new job and haven't had a chance to really look at it closely. But just looking at the TP link, I found a command injection vulnerability, and unfortunately found that that had already been reported. So yeah, I guess nothing cool so far in that department. But yeah, that would pretty much be the coolest thing that I found so far, would just be the command injection.
I mean, that's cool. That just because someone else found it before you doesn't mean it's not less cool. You know,
Yeah,
not
admittedly,
as
like I
not as
said,
fun, but cool.
yeah, like I said, I'm still pretty new at it myself. So yeah, I really want to be able to look at this, but again, like getting pulled in a lot of different directions, it's hard to it's hard to balance all the stuff that you want to look at.
I'm right there with you. I know enough to be dangerous. I've done like one holiday hack challenge a few years ago where they implemented some of this. It was really fun. I just haven't touched it since, but always wanted to. Too busy with family and junk and stuff.
Yeah, I was hoping that this would force me, like, probably the area that I'm like the least competent in is binary exploitation. So I was kind of hoping that this would force me and like give me enough of an excuse to really get better at that stuff. Like I've done like, you know, what I needed to for like OSCP, for the buffer overflows and that, but I was hoping to maybe get into a little bit of the stuff that I've got stumped on like Hack the Box, where you get past those like basic buffer overflows.
Yeah, I mean, I thought the same too because I'm not great at that either. But knowing that people, like I mentioned earlier, found something as simple as just like stringsing the binary, like something super easy to do first, you know, first thing you might try when you get a binary just to get a lucky hit. Knowing that they found something cool just by doing that was kind of, you know, motivating. Like, all right, maybe I could find something.
Yeah, don't overthink it, right? Oh yeah, I would definitely recommend the Flash Pwn. That's actually where I first got the inspiration to go take a look at this. So I would highly recommend checking them out. This was like a portion of where they reported like finding a really awesome vulnerability in a router. This was like how they showed that they went about finding it, was using this exact technique to get on the router and be able to look at the binaries on there. So yeah, highly recommend checking them out.
Anyone else have any questions or comments?
Cory, I think you've motivated all of us to break out our soldering irons again.
Hey, soldering's a lot of fun. You can burn up a lot of stuff with it. Yourself included.
Yeah, thanks for the talk. Awesome talk, Cory.
Yeah, thanks, Cory.
Yeah, most of my soldering experience was just from like messing around with cars, modifying cars. So I'd never really messed with like smaller stuff too much.
I keep like running the other sides of the house that are quiet without my kids screaming to talk. But along that note, I mentioned earlier that I first got exposure to it like 3 years back or so on the holiday hack challenge from Sands. Do you know of any current fun, I don't know, capture the flag style stuff that implements it? I think you mentioned one earlier, but sometimes we may not have like the motivation, tools, time, whatever to go buy something and get all the soldering iron, everything out. I know that there's some CTF type stuff out there that'll give you the basic rundown of what was done and then give you the firmware and let you kind of poke through it. You mentioned something on Hack the Box. I don't know if that was a hardware hacking challenge, but do you know of any that you could recommend?
No, the one that I came across was from, it was from Flashback Pwn. So let me,
Yeah, I know you mentioned one earlier. I just couldn't remember what it was. So figured if you know any more, that might be a fun resource.
theirs was Let's see. So I'll drop it in chat. Theirs was part of a competition that they did, where they got rewarded for it. So I don't know if it would necessarily fall into like the CTF realm, but I know just from like a quick search, I've mainly just messed around with it on my own. But from a quick search, I did see a few come up. So
So Google it.
yeah, yeah, it looks like quite a few of them come up on Google. So I'm seeing like hardware.io. Not sure if this, yeah, this is in 2019. Never mind. I guess maybe not too much now that you can't really get together because of COVID and all that. Oh yeah, actually this site was pretty good. I remember looking at this a while back. I would probably keep an eye out here at ctftime.org. I remember seeing that a while back. I believe it has some from time to time. That would probably be where I would keep an eye out. And then I've noticed the more and more that I follow different people on Twitter that are in different realms, like that's a good way to kind of get alerted about stuff too. You know, people that are really good at hardware hacking, like a lot better than like myself. You know, they would probably, you know, share stuff like that just because everybody kind of gets in their little realm. Mine tends to be like looking at web apps. So I'm just kind of now getting into hardware hacking. So yeah, just good excuse to always follow people that you come across.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm gonna paste some of these links that you're putting in chat into the Pwn School Slack. I'm just trying to decide if I just put it into general or if I put it into the Pwning IoT channel.
Okay. Yeah, I would definitely look for these types of things, not just on routers. I would look for it on, you know, any type of little devices. Just kind of something to keep an eye out for if you're taking them apart. Like, hey, that looks familiar. Can I use that for this or for something similar? You know.
For sure. Sorry, I'm staying muted so you don't have your kids screaming.
No worries. Mine's back there screaming too. So
Yeah, dude. Crazy times.
yeah.
Any other questions?
I apologize if any of my slides didn't work right or anything like that. So, or if the camera wasn't focused and stuff.
It was all good.
We can use our imaginations.
Yeah.
Phil can insert memes in the recording, you know, as you go.
Hey man, I'm down with memes. That's my true skill in InfoSec.
Cool. Well, I don't have any questions. Anybody else have any questions? I like the open Q&A. I think it's so fun as a speaker and as an attender just to hear people's thoughts. No dumb questions. I think it's fun for discussion.
He's saying that that no question is dumb, not saying not to ask dumb questions.
I guarantee you,
Don't
there's people
intention-
in this room that know
don't-
more
don't
than I do
intention-
about this stuff. So
Don't intentionally ask dumb questions, I guess. But yeah, there are no dumb questions. Go for it. Well, that was my attempt to milk any more questions out. I guess it didn't work.
But there is one last comment though. In in Allen, right at I don't know, Plano Road and Bethany or whatever. There used to be a used computer store with all sorts of old hardware. In Irving, and I couldn't tell you exactly where, but there's McDonald's on one corner, and there's a big white colored strip mall. There used to be another one in Arlington, on, good heavens, I've forgotten the street. There used to be another one. They're all gone. All of the used computer stores that I know of in this area are gone, except for the guys that are selling, off lease Dells for 3 times what you pay for them off of eBay. And
I'll tell you where they moved those stores to. They moved them to Craigslist and Facebook Marketplace.
Yeah.
It's like you got to go to places like that now just to find stuff. That's where I've gotten like used servers. You may pay like
Wow.
a couple $100 for like a nice used server. I found a used server for a couple $100 on Craigslist, and I forgot if it was Facebook Marketplace or Craigslist. I also got like a full-on server rack. It was, trust me, I don't need one by any means, but it fit in a spot I had in my laundry room, and it was cheaper because of like retired ones out of, I think mine came out of like a layer 3 data center or something like that. But anyways, it was $75. I got a full server rack, everything I needed for $75, and a dude delivered it from Richardson to Denton to me. So
that is
you can find
awesome.
some good, yeah, so you can find some good stuff. You just can't go to used computer stores anymore. They're like nostalgia at this point.
And where'd you find this at?
Both of those that I mentioned, I believe those were on Craigslist, but now, man, you seem like you go more and more, you have to go to like Facebook Marketplace. This is what everybody's using as opposed to Craigslist, because you can like securely communicate and pay and all this stuff. So I just like put
And
my wife on the task at the time.
I just weaned myself off of Facebook.
We'll make a fake account, don't add anybody, and use it for that.
Okay.
Put really creepy pictures on your profile picture, so when you message them, they're a little on edge. No, you can use Facebook. You can use Facebook without having to actively be on there.
That would be my real face, but yeah,
Well,
okay,
that works.
it probably would, but yeah, okay. So Facebook Marketplace, Craigslist scared me a long time ago, so I'm not sure about that, but yeah.
Yeah, it can, because you can get scammed on you can get scammed on both. Let's be honest. So you just got to know the things to look out for.
Yeah.
You're less likely, I guess, to get scammed on eBay. And there's still some great deals on eBay. Don't mistake that either. eBay's still well and alive on a lot of things as well.
Yeah.
But as long as you're not telling someone to come to your house and do different exchanges that you're not comfortable with, that's fine. Like, I don't let my wife go do those things. I show up and do door drops and stuff, and if they beat me up, I guess whatever.
Thank you, Cory. Cory just added a link to the chat.
Yeah.
This is all good stuff. I really appreciate this stuff, because it's got to be cheap if I'm going to get it past the wife's scrutiny.
Yeah, server supply, I remember from like 2 jobs ago, as a sysadmin, we would look for stuff on there. But I can't remember if they have used stuff on there or not. I think they just may have refurbished, but somebody on here may know for sure.
Yeah, I don't. I've looked at some of those, but I think I always ended up finding them local. But yeah, and also about not spending money or getting it past the wife or whatever the qualifications are. That's why I mentioned some of this stuff you can find firmware to download with the mindset of tearing apart and messing with it, just to kind of get your hands dirty and see if you like it or not before you go starting to buy hardware and really explore on your own.
Yeah.
Kind of like a soft entry point,
Yeah, like
That's good.
I pulled the firmware for the I think both of these, and you can just bin walk it, and you get a pretty. I mean, it's basically going to be the same thing that you see on the router, just not in motion, so to speak. So
Yeah,
that can be a good route too.
That's what Holly Hack Challenge is. They basically the point was to force you to learn how to do bin walk basically. So they gave you the firmware, told you to run it through bin walk, and you basically ended up with a little file system you could just poke through. And I think like there was
Squash
creds or
FS.
yeah, there's like creds or something that were chilling in like a Mongo database, which is all just, you know, flat text files, and you had to do some search through that and find what you're looking for. It was relatively simple, and again, gives you hope that, oh, maybe I could find something cool without being a wizard, you know?
No, thanks again for the talk, Cory. We appreciate it. Thanks everyone for joining.
Yep.